What's going on, everyone? In today's episode, I'm going to share with you a few things you never want to do when trying to attract pollinators into your garden. Let's go. So when it comes to pollinators, not just honeybees, but all pollinators, they couldn't be more vital to the garden, especially fruits and vegetables, because so many of the fruits and vegetables that we consume on a daily basis are pollinated and are produced with the help of pollinators. So things like honeybees, bumblebees, even flies and butterflies can be pollinators. I mean, heck, ants can be pollinators. But these insects are very important to the garden, and if we keep them in the garden, we give them a good home, they're gonna do your garden some good favors. So let's talk about some things you don't want to do. First biggest mistake is not planting enough biodiversity. I cannot tell you how many gardeners they'll find a favorite flower and they'll only plant one of it, or they'll only plant out like basically a monoculture. As gardeners, we want to make sure that we are not planting out monocultures, because monocultures, even on a small scale, don't have the biggest benefit. So what we're doing here, this is going to be a pollinator garden, and we're going to have a ton of biodiversity because there's so many different pollinators that are attracted to different flowers. So we have here some of these Papaver mix poppies. We also have some phlox, some dianthus. We have here this tick seed. This is some red hot poker. This flowers later in the summer. We have some lavender, just tons of absolutely beautiful flowers. And we're gonna be planting a lot more than just what we have here. We're also gonna be planting some herbs that flower, things like dill, other things like fennel, basil, tons of flowers to offer biodiversity so that the pollinators that are coming from all around are gonna be attracted and wanna stay here. Because if they come into the area and there's only one food source, well, let's face it, if you plant one type of flower, like for instance, phlox for instance, right? They have a prime flowering season. After the flowering season is done, they're done. Well, dianthus is a prime example of that. Dianthus will flower right about now till about early to mid-July. Once it gets hot, they're done. They may put a second flush of flowers on when it gets colder in the fall, but generally it's like a once and done type flower. So what we want is we want year-round color, or at least summer-long color, because that way there's gonna be more time for pollinators to enter your garden and stick around to pollinate all your crops. Second mistake people make is not planting enough. Now, when you're planting out a pollinator garden, pollinators look for a cue, a color cue. And when they're flying, it could be a bird, hummingbirds, a butterfly that's migrating by, like a monarch. It could be a honeybee flying by. They don't always fly by a foot off the ground. Some are quite high in the air. And so when you have a pollinator garden, you want to make sure that your pollinator garden is like a signal in the sky, right? Like the big bat signal. You want to be able to see it from a long ways away. A really great example that was given to me was the example of, they call it kind of the Google Earth analogy. If you put a trampoline in your backyard and you go onto Google Earth and you say, you're zoomed all the way out, you're looking at like your whole entire state. You can make up some features. You can make up some pretty large kind of monuments and stuff like that. You're not gonna find a trampoline. And so you have to think about that, right? That as when one flower is in your garden, like if you plant up a tiny little pot of flowers, hoping to attract pollinators into your garden, it's wishful thinking, because that one flower is not going to be a calling card. You might get lucky and one might kind of stop passing by, but unfortunately, a lot of times they kind of just get missed for bigger patches of flowers elsewhere. And so make sure, using that Google Earth analogy, right, that you make sure that your garden is visible from space. You want, not really literally space, but you want things to be seen from a distance so that that color pops and says, hey, I'm a flower, I need to be pollinated, and I'm a food source for anyone out there that can see me.
This is Blue Leader. We have Rose's visual. Bring it around 30 degrees and hold. Roses.
Now, the next part to that mistake is that if you don't plant enough, there's not enough of a food source to be even worth their while. You have to remember, if you had to run a marathon and at the end of the marathon, all you got was a oyster cracker, it probably wouldn't be worth it. But if someone said, run this marathon, and at the end, we'll give you a 5-course meal, that's incentive to get from point A to point B. And insects are absolutely the same way. Pollinators are advantageous. They are going to look for the highest risk to reward, because that energy that they exert getting from point A to point B needs to be met with some type of reward. And honeybees, butterflies, bumblebees, it doesn't matter what it is, they're going to look for the closest and the largest food source possible. And so that if you plant out like a single little pot of flowers, you may get lucky. There may be one passing by that says, yeah, I'll stop for a snack. But if they're gonna make a journey or make it their home, there needs to be a good amount of it planted. And one is probably not gonna cut it. Next biggest mistake is not providing a water feature for your pollinator garden. If you're trying to attract pollinators into your garden, they need a drink just like you and I do. And regardless of the insect, they will often feed and then drink shortly after. And so if you don't have a water feature close by, it's not going to encourage them to stay longer in your garden. Now, what we're gonna do, we don't have it yet, but we're gonna actually put a bird bath right in the center of this pollinator garden here. And I'm really excited about it because rather than give water for birds, I'm sure they'll still stop for a drink. What we're gonna do is we're gonna fill up the bird bath with stones. We're gonna fill it up with some pea gravel so that we only have about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of water, because pollinators like honeybees or butterflies, they won't go to deep water because it's a drowning risk. They'll hang around the outside of the bird bath, but they won't get a drink from the center. So it really limits the amount of surface area that you can attract a pollinator. And so we're gonna fill that up, and I would highly encourage you to, it doesn't have to be a bird bath. It could be a butter container filled with some stones and some water, no more than 1/2 inch deep of water, because it could have a lot of water in it, but if you have that kind of 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch zone where they can kind of stand on a rock or stand kind of in shallow water, but drink from anywhere in the bird bath, it's going to open up so many more possibilities to attracting pollinators into your garden, and it's going to encourage them to want to stay longer. All right, and the final, and I think one of the biggest mistakes, I'd put this at number 1, which is why I saved it for last. The biggest mistake that gardeners make when planting out a pollinator garden or trying to attract pollinators to their garden is not providing food. Now, it goes without saying that they're going to be attracted to flowers, but the thing is so many times we fail to remember this, that they're not going to be attracted to things like lettuce. They don't have a flower. At least when they do flower, you're not consuming them. They've already gone to seed. If you let them go to seed, fine. That's a different story. But most gardeners, when they plant out things like lettuce or kale or your leafy green crops, they don't have a flower that actually offers food. They are plants, but no honeybee is going to care or give it the time of day because there's no food there. Now, that's an extreme example. What if we talk about actual flowers? Well, there's a lot of flowers that they don't provide adequate nutrition for pollinators. Prime example is a flower that's actually called the butterfly bush. The butterfly bush, they actually provide a lot of beautiful flowers, but they don't provide adequate nutrition for things like bumblebees or honeybees, right? So they don't give the nutritional sustenance that a good pollen-containing flower or a good nectar-containing flower is going to provide. So you can look at food sources being broken down into 2 different categories. You have your protein and you have your carbohydrate. And so pollen is like your protein, whereas your nectar is your carbohydrate. It's your sugar source. And you need a good combination of both of those. And there's a lot of flowers that provide both pollen and nectar. Some will only provide pollen, some will only provide nectar. But if you have something that has poor nutritional content, there's not really any reason for the pollinators to stick around in your garden because they're gonna stop. It's a beautiful flower. And they're gonna say, ooh, maybe. They're gonna try it and they'll say, nah, not worth it. I can tell this is not gonna sustain me. And they'll move on. So just because a flower is beautiful does not mean it's going to attract pollinators. So like I said, it kind of goes hand in hand with planting out biodiversity, right? The more biodiverse our garden is, the more chances we have something that someone is gonna like. Pollinators can be a little bit picky. Some pollinators, like honeybees, they'll feed on over 60% of our crops. Honeybees are kind of the exception to that rule because something like a monarch butterfly is very particular. They will only consume roughly 10 to 20% of the plants we put out. And so we really want to make sure that we put out a good variety of food so that we can attract all the different pollinators that exist. So I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new. If you did, make sure to hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know if you're planting out a pollinator garden of your own or some ways that you've attracted pollinators into your garden. I know that a lot of you are going to ask this. I know you guys are going to ask about things like pollinator houses. Yes, it's a wonderful option and something that I would definitely recommend adding into your garden. But some people do not want to you can definitely keep them in your garden if you put things like a bee house or a butterfly house or things like that in your garden, but it's not a necessity. By simply providing a good food source and a good variety, you're gonna keep them in your garden all summer long, and they're gonna remember that, and they're gonna come back next year. So I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. Bye. Hey, thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, consider checking this one out. You'll probably enjoy it just as much. I want to thank you so much for your viewership, because without it, this channel would not be as amazing as it is. If you haven't subscribed yet, it's free. Consider doing that. We upload every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, rain or shine. And if you need any garden tools, supplies, or seeds, check out MIgardener.com. We got you covered. See you guys in the garden. Bye.